Welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping straight into a fascinating classic biographical piece by the celebrated American author Nathaniel Hawthorne called Sir Isaac Newton, the Ingenious Scientist. Now, when we hear the name Isaac Newton, we instantly think of the brilliant, world-changing mind that decoded gravity, right? But Hawthorne's text gives us a truly captivating look at how a young boy who just loved to tinker with miniature machinery evolved into the master of the cosmos. In this explainer, we're going to trace that incredible journey from a curious kid in a small English village to a man who literally mapped the heavens.
Okay, before we get to the stars, I want to start with a question to get us all thinking like young Newton. How do you measure the wind without any instruments? Just picture this. You're a young boy in the 1600s. This is way before modern meteorology. You want to calculate the force of an incoming storm, but you have absolutely zero tools to do it. How in the world would you solve a complex physics problem like that using only your body?
Well, here is the brilliantly simple answer: jumping against it. Hawthorne tells us that young Isaac possessed this wonderful knack for acquiring knowledge by the simplest means possible. To figure out the strength of the wind, he would literally go outside and jump against it. By measuring the length of his jump on a calm day versus jumping against the wind on a stormy day, he could accurately calculate the force of a gentle breeze, a brisk gale, or an absolute tempest. It's just such a perfect example of his deeply practical, hands-on curiosity.
Section 1. The Tinkerer, a childhood of miniature machinery.
Born on Christmas Day back in 1642 in the small English village of Woolsthorpe, young Isaac was left to the care of his good old grandmother after his father passed away. Hawthorne points out that in these early years, his mother had no idea her newborn was destined to explain mysteries that had baffled humanity since the dawn of time. Instead of playing typical childhood games, he was manufacturing. He actually made his own set of little tools and saws of various sizes, and with these, he built curious articles with so much skill that his neighbors joked he must have been born with a saw or chisel in his hand. I mean, he built a clock that didn't use normal wheels and weights, but rather the dropping of water to keep time, which was a huge source of wonder for the whole neighborhood. He even built a sundial, which Hawthorne notes was still sitting there at Woolsthorpe centuries later. His grandmother and the locals admired his skills so much they were absolutely convinced he was destined to be a wealthy, highly successful clockmaker.
Moving on to Section 2. Mastering the wind, capturing the power of air.
Isaac soon scaled up his ambitions from clocks to mastering the wind itself. Not too far from his grandmother's house, there was a windmill operating on a new mechanical plan, and Isaac became utterly fascinated by it. Hawthorne describes how the boy would go there frequently, spending hours upon hours just staring at its various parts. When the mill was quiet, he'd pry into its internal machinery, analyzing all the gears. And when the wind caught the broad sails, he carefully watched the process by which the millstones revolved to crush the grain. So, what did he do with all that intense observation? He went home and built his own. And we're not talking about a crude toy. It was a perfectly accurate mechanical model. Every single part of the mill and its machinery was complete. He neatly crafted the little sails out of linen. The mechanism was so incredibly smooth that just a simple puff of breath from Isaac's mouth was enough to set the sails in motion. And here's the best part. If you put a handful of real grains of wheat into the little hopper, the model would actually grind them into snow-white flour. He had literally captured the mechanics of the wind on a desktop scale.
Naturally, Isaac's playmates were completely enchanted by this new miniature windmill. But Hawthorne shares a wonderful little anecdote where a playmate interrupts all the admiration to point out a tiny missing piece of this otherwise perfect replica. The friend asks, "But Isaac, you have forgotten one thing. Where is the miller?" And Isaac realized, you know what? His friend was right. A working mill needed a working miller to oversee it.
So the crucial takeaway here is how Isaac's sharp intellect responded to this critique. He knew he needed to supply this deficiency. Now, he could have easily just carved a little wooden man, but Hawthorne humorously implies Isaac considered using a small quadruped, like a mouse, to play the role of the miller. Why? Well, because, as Isaac reasoned, perhaps some human, two-legged millers are quite as dishonest as this small quadruped. Even as a young boy, he had this incredibly sharp, witty perspective on the world around him. Section 3. Beyond the farm. The shift to scholar.
As Isaac grew older, he started swapping his mechanical toys for heavy books and stargazing. It soon became pretty obvious that his mind held far more important matters than just manufacturing small models. If left to himself all day, Isaac would be entirely absorbed in thought or deeply engaged in complex mathematics.
The boy who used to stare at the gears of a windmill began spending his nights gazing up at the stars with reverential curiosity, wondering what immense power kept them in their courses. Born in 1642, his life took a major pivot at age 14. His mother actually pulled him out of school to assist her in managing the family farm at Woolsthorpe, and for a year or two, Isaac genuinely tried to turn his attention to agriculture. But he failed terribly at it. His mind was just so intensely bent on becoming a scholar. Thankfully, his mother recognized this and sent him back to school, which paved the way for his entry into the prestigious University of Cambridge. Honestly, farming's loss became humanity's greatest scientific gain.
Section 4. Decoding the Universe, the Universal Mechanic.
So the boy, who was the master mechanic of the village, was about to become the universal mechanic. He took that exact same intense, observational focus he used on the water clock and the windmill, and he applied it to the macro scale of the heavens. Hawthorne highlights that Newton was the first to find out the true nature of light. Before him, nobody actually knew what sunshine was composed of. And of course, we have the legendary story of the apple falling on his head. That simple, everyday observation, much like jumping against the wind, led him to discover the massive force of gravitation. And once he caught hold of that idea, his mind never rested until he had searched out and mathematically mapped all the laws by which the planets are guided through the sky.
Hawthorne draws a really beautiful parallel here. On one side, we have the boy who pried into and discovered the exact mechanism of a local windmill. And on the other, we have the man who used that exact same mindset to explain the mechanism of the entire universe to his fellow men. It's like looking at the exact same genius, just scaled up from a tiny desk to the infinite cosmos. Now, toward the end of his text, Hawthorne includes a fascinating little dialogue between a boy named George and his teacher, Mr. Temple. George asks a highly practical question. I suppose if Sir Isaac Newton had only thought of it, he might have found out the steam engine and railroads? It's a great point. With all that raw mechanical skill, could he have just fast-tracked the Industrial Revolution instead of staring at distant planets? Mr. Temple's response provides an incredible shift in perspective. He replies that, yes, Newton very possibly could have invented those things, and sure, a lot of people might think manufacturing steam engines is more immediately useful for daily life. But Mr. Temple argues that manufacturing machines is a mere trifle in comparison to the monumental achievement of searching out and understanding the very system of the universe. Newton's theoretical work elevated human consciousness in a way that practical machinery simply couldn't match.
Finally, Section 5. The Ocean of Truth, Humility, Ingenious.
Newton lived to be a very old man, dying in 1727 at the age of 85. He became a highly renowned thinker, served as a member of Parliament, and even received the high honor of knighthood from the King of England. But what is truly remarkable is that he cared very little for earthly fame. Despite all these incredible honors, he felt absolutely no pride in the vastness of his knowledge. Why was he so humble? Well, because of what he called the boundless ocean of truth. Hawthorne explains that everything Newton had learned in his entire brilliant lifetime only made him acutely aware of how little he actually knew in comparison to what still remained out there. Every single question he answered just revealed 100 new mysteries waiting in the dark.
This mindset gave birth to one of the most profound and poetic quotes in the history of science, which Hawthorne includes in his text. Newton famously observed, "I seem to myself like a child playing on the seashore and picking up here and there a curious shell or a pretty pebble, while the boundless ocean of truth lies undiscovered before me." It is just such a stunning image. After mapping the entire cosmos, he brings the narrative full circle. He still views himself simply as that curious little boy tinkering on the shore of existence. As Hawthorne notes, Newton left behind a fame as endurable as if his name were written in stars upon the midnight sky.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder today. Newton showed us that the universe is just a massive machine waiting to be understood, whether it's a wooden windmill or a whole solar system. He approached all of it with the eager, humble curiosity of a child on a beach. So, I leave you with this question. What curious shell will you pick up next from the boundless ocean of truth? Keep jumping against the wind, keep asking questions, and keep exploring. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.